Words hold power when you're grieving, and knowing the difference between loss, bereavement, grief, and mourning, these four things, is not just about being technical, it's about naming the experience that you're going through right now with more truth and more compassion for yourself. Because I'll tell you what, grief is already hard, and feeling confused about what's happening makes it even harder. And clear language, when you use it or when you ask other people to use it with you or about you, creates space for understanding, for permission to feel your feelings, to have your identity shift, to do things out in the world, and for healing. Hi there, grief growers, and welcome back to Grief Grower. I am so glad to be here with you as always. If you have been growing alongside me in my work for a while, welcome back. And if you are new to the show, if you have just discovered us today, welcome. This is Grief Grower, and my name is Shelby Forsythia. I am a grief coach. I'm a two-time author, soon to be three-time author, and founder of Life After Loss Academy, which is an online course that has helped grievers across the world stop feeling lost, stuck, broken, and alone, and start building lives that they genuinely love from the lives that loss forced them to live. This, of course, includes not only death losses, because grief is so much more than death, but also losses like divorce and breakup, major diagnosis, geographic move, and any other loss that changes your life. Again, if you're new to the show, we believe here that grief is not something to get over. Grief is something to grow through and with and alongside. It is a part of life. It is not a detour from life. And that really matters. And that it is possible in life after loss to create something that feels good to us, inclusive of the loss we faced and inclusive of all the lessons, for lack of better phrasing, that loss brings to our door, inclusive of the people we've lost, the relationships we've nurtured and that have fallen away, and the decisions that we've made or the choices we've been forced to make that can never be undone. There are losses a lot of times that we do not choose, and there are losses sometimes that we do. There are things that we opt into experiencing. When you decide to go to school, you are saying no to a different career path. When you decide to become married, you are saying no to a single life. When you decide to have children, you are saying no to a life without children. There are so many things that as you gain, you lose. And as you move forward, you leave behind. So many of them, when we think of grief, are things that we don't opt into, such as the death of somebody that we love, a divorce that we did not ask for or instigate, a diagnosis that we had no desire of ever having. These are things that often, when people think of loss, we think of the awful things that are foisted upon us, that happen to us, that occur in the timeline of our lives. And there are also losses that we opt into. And here on Grief Grower, this is what I'm intending to say by all of this, we honor all of it. We honor the fact that you can live a good life inclusive of all of these losses, whatever that means to you. A lot of people say, I want to be at peace. I want to find happiness or hope again. I want to feel grounded. I want to have some sort of purpose in the world. And I believe that it is possible to build a life that you actually like living from a devastating loss or collection of losses that you have been forced to live. And loss is not a bad thing. It's not a moral thing. It's not something you manifested upon yourself. It is a thing that happens by sheer nature of being alive. When you go to sleep at night, you lose another day, and you gain the wisdom that that day you just lived just brought you. It is a balancing act. And it is possible for loss to not be the thing that ruins your life, but something that is folded in with it. And for grief to not be the stone that you carry around your neck, but a living thing, an ever-evolving thing that you grow alongside. And if you're curious about more of that, you can go back to episode 2 of Grief Grower, where we talk about what it means to be a grief grower, because all of that is included there. Today we're going to be talking about Words, because words are very important in grief. I know for me, I have changed a lot of how I talk about grief and loss, based on what grieving people have told me, what I feel for myself in the midst of grief. That goes for everything from saying they're in a better place now, or everything happens for a reason, cliches and the words we use when we talk about grief, to saying things like, this is really hard. This sucks. This is shit. I'm so sorry this is your reality right now. There are very, very different ways to talk about grief as it is happening to people. But today I want to get us back to bare bones of like, let's do foundational basics. Loss, bereavement, grief, and mourning. These four words, they're often used interchangeably, but there is a difference between those four. And so if you're not familiar with what they are, or you've been using them interchangeably, which not your fault, a lot of people in society do the same thing, I would love to help kind of drill down on exactly what they are and why it matters to know the difference between them, because you've often probably heard these things interchange between each other. People will say things like, I'm so sorry for your loss, or are you still in mourning, or he took bereavement leave, but they don't really talk about how these things are different from each other, and they are. Loss, grief, bereavement, and mourning each kind of is pointing at a slightly different thing, a slightly different part of the experience of life after loss, and understanding the difference between them can help you not only make sense of like what you're feeling and where you are right now, but can also give you the sense that you're navigating your life with a little bit more clarity. And clarity is really, really helpful when you're grieving, because it's something that oftentimes we feel we don't have a lot of. So let's get into it. Number one, loss is the thing that happened. I often refer to the difference between loss and grief as loss is the thing that happened and grief is everything that comes after. We'll get to grief in a second. But loss refers to whatever the event was, the moment that your life split into this is life before and this is life after. This can be death, and most people, when they say life after loss, they're referring to a death, but you can also say it for divorce or the end of a significant relationship. This can also be romantic or platonic relationships, like a friendship loss. This can be a major diagnosis, whether for you or somebody you love, because you can be changed by other people's diagnoses. This can be losing a job, losing financial stability, miscarriage, infertility, or childlessness that was not your choice. This can be moving away from a home or a community, or having to leave the country, again, whether by choice or by force. This can be estrangement or religious separation, or a loss of purpose, or a shift in your identity. I'm thinking midlife in this for a lot of people. Or, as in the sense of a lot of things where you experience a difficult event, but you come out of it alive, there can also be this sense of, in that moment, I lost my ideas of safety, of certainty, of a future that I once imagined. So I'm thinking, as a queer person, I often think of life for people who have been the victims of a hate crime but survived. It can be the death of a time when they thought the world was a safe place, or when they thought they had friends they could trust. And that is a loss event, even though there is not a death that has taken place. So loss is the moment that something in your life permanently changed, either suddenly or over time. This can be an event that often society will perceive as negative, that requires some kind of recalibration or readjustment or emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual processing. In Life After Loss Academy, and this is the course I talk about that I teach on living life after devastating loss, we go through the 5-step grief method. I often refer to loss as like a one-way door. And once you cross through it, you cannot cross back over it. Your life before is closed to you permanently. Once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, you can't unknow. And your only choice after devastating loss is to move forward into a world where this loss is true. It is now a foundational reality of the life that you're living right now. And as my mom would probably say, whether you like it or not, this can be incredibly painful. And recognizing all the ways your house is now built on a foundation of loss in some ways can be really staggering. And also, something we talk about in Life After Loss Academy is acceptance is not about liking the thing that happened. Far from it. Acceptance, in the words of Cheryl Strayed, is about embracing what's true. So yes, the foundation of my life in some part is composed of loss, but it's also composed of truth. These are things that have happened to me and inform all of my decisions, all of my actions, all of my choices going forward into the future. I am a person who's been impacted by, in my own life, mother loss, the death of my best friend to COVID, pet loss, the breakup of an engagement. That influences how I move forward into my life. It's something that myself is built upon. It's not all of it. I have so much more to me than just the losses I have experienced, which I know is true for you too. And the loss, the things that have happened, are part of my almost like structural DNA makeup. And I see that as a foundational truth for everyone who's experienced any kind of loss. Okay, let's move on to grief. I mentioned grief is loss is the thing that happened. Grief is everything that comes after. Grief is the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual experience of living in the aftermath of loss. In other words, loss is the thing that happened. Grief is everything that comes after. Notice I did not put a time frame on this. Grief can include, but certainly is not limited to, here's a list for you: sobbing uncontrollably, lashing out in anger or going numb, feeling anxious about your own or other people's mortality once you recognize, oh, they died, I'm going to die, they're going to die, we're all going to die. That's a very real experience in life after loss. You might do things I certainly did, like replaying the loss or a person's final days, or analyzing anything you could have done differently, kind of making up new scenarios, or revisiting old scenarios in your mind. You could certainly be questioning your identity or your place in the world. If they're not here, if that relationship's not true, if this diagnosis is true, who the hell am I now? Grieving identity is a very big part of grief. You might feel exhausted on every level, especially right now in 2025. You might have difficulty concentrating or regularly forgetting things, also known as grief brain, and we're going to do a whole podcast episode on grief brain. You might have trouble trusting yourself or making decisions. A lot of people I work with say, yes, I'm grieving the person who died, or yes, I'm grieving this relationship, but I'm also grieving being able to trust myself to know things or to make decisions for my benefit in the future. Big deal when you're grieving. A lot of people say, I feel disconnected or resentful of people who do not get it. And so kind of this distance from friend and family groups, especially initially after the loss, is a really big deal. You might have sudden surges of emotions months or even years later. That's why we talk about grief being ongoing and growing through grief for the rest of our life. You might, kind of in a more positive or fluffy note, notice signs or symbols related to your loss. You may find like little hope nuggets scattered around that give you sort of a buoyancy or a lightness in life after loss. On that same note, you might shift your perspective on life. You might get your priorities in a different order after a devastating loss, or feel something like more joy or gratitude or appreciation for your life. This can be what a lot of people call a positive consequence of grief. Is like, oh my God, I realized I was working too much. Or, oh my God, I started telling people I love them more often. These can be very positive or affirming consequences in air quotes, that come after a devastating loss. And I like to refer to it, grief, as the whole kit and caboodle of life after loss. It's the good, it's the bad, it's everything in between. It's the immediate awfulness, the grief brain, the forgetfulness, the reliving their final moments, but it's also the long-term coping and remembering and meaning making and carrying your memories of a person or an experience forward. Grief is a thing that you are not doing battle with. It's not a thing you're trying to get over and then get back to your life. It's a thing that is accompanying you through life. It is just as present with you in happy moments as it is in difficult ones. And in Life After Loss Academy, and in my work as a grief coach, and in every book I've ever written, I talk about grief being a long-term relationship and kind of this umbrella under which we include our next two words, bereavement and mourning. Words hold power when you're grieving, and knowing the difference between loss, bereavement, grief, and mourning, these four things, is not just about being technical. It's about naming the experience that you're going through right now with more truth and more compassion for yourself. Because I'll tell you what, grief is already hard, and feeling confused about what's happening makes it even harder. And clear language, when you use it or when you ask other people to use it with you or about you, creates space for understanding, for permission to feel your feelings, to have your identity shift, to do things out in the world, and for healing. Words hold power when you're grieving, and knowing the difference between loss, bereavement, grief, and mourning, these four things, is not just about being technical. It's about naming the experience that you're going through right now with more truth and more compassion for yourself. Because I'll tell you what, grief is already hard, and feeling confused about what's happening makes it even harder. And clear language, when you use it or when you ask other people to use it with you or about you, creates space for understanding, for permission to feel your feelings, to have your identity shift, to do things out in the world, and for healing. Okay, so number 3 is bereavement, and this is the social label for loss, grief, mourning, kind of all of it. It is kind of Also, depending on where you live, because I know bereavement is used a lot more in places like the UK than it is in the United States, but bereavement is often referred to as the formal state of being deprived of someone or something, and it is most frequently used in social, medical, or institutional contexts. So people will say things like, oh, she's on bereavement leave, they just joined a bereavement group, we sent a bereavement card or a sympathy card, and he is a member of the bereaved family. And so it's kind of used. I want to almost like put my tie in my little shirt collar. I'm like, it's very official. To be bereaved seems like a more formal or logistical way of saying that person is in a state of grief. That person is uh, in a season of loss. It is usually exclusively attached to death related losses, which is kind of a bummer because you can be bereaved for literally anything. But I have seen here and there some people sparingly applying it more broadly to things like divorce or diagnosis, although that's a little bit more rare right now. Bereavement as a term is the way that society acknowledges that someone or something significant has been lost, and that the person who has experienced this significant loss is in a season of disruption. Something has happened in your life, you are currently recalibrating. The downside of the term bereavement, though, is that it's often bound by time. So loss is a before and after moment. Grief is kind of everything that happens in the aftermath of that. But bereavement, especially when it's used in medical and social and workplace contexts, is time bound. So the company you work for might give you 3 days off as a form of bereavement leave. People might check in during the funeral and then disappear and consider the time for quote unquote bereavement support over. We're no longer sending bereavement cards. In many ways, bereavement is kind of an unfortunate term, and it's one I don't use very often because it has this implied or built in sort of expiration date. And I don't love that personally, and a lot of people I talk to don't like this either because we know intimately and intuitively that grief has no expiration date. And understanding that society uses the term bereavement and how society uses bereavement can often help explain why a lot of grieving people in the world feel rushed or ignored or unsupported after this like allotted, unspecified or specified bereavement time is over. So this again is something I very, very rarely use to describe people who are grieving. I'd rather say grievers or people who are grieving because that gives us so much more time to work with and so much less limitations. Lastly, let's get to number 4, which is mourning. Mourning, for me and for so many other grief professionals, defines the outward expression of grief through sounds, gestures, rituals, or communal practices outside of your body, out in the world. This can look like crying openly by yourself with others, that is mourning. You can attend a funeral or a celebration of life. You are physically putting your body in a place to memorialize someone. You might wear black clothing or memorial jewelry or clothing of a loved one or jewelry from a loved one. You might sit Shiva or light a yahrzeit candle. You might create an altar, art, music, or a personal ritual of your own to kind of perform grief, whether this is public or private. You can do either one. And you might speak your person's name at the dinner table, especially when it comes to death-related loss. A lot of places I've seen define mourning as bringing private pain into public spaces. It is how you demonstrate to the world, and sometimes to yourself, that something important has changed or something important has happened. You have experienced a loss, and that you yourself are a different person as a result. It can feel, I think I used this word just a few seconds ago, but like a performance of grief. It's I am performing grief out in public, and it doesn't mean your grief is fake. It is expressing it, it's moving it through your body. In many cultures, mourning is something that is time bound, but it's also visible to other people and supported for that reason. So I mentioned the yahrzeit candle. So in Judaism, mourners sit Shiva for 7 days, and they're surrounded by community and prayer and tradition. In a lot of places in Latin cultures, Dia de los Muertos invites people to create altars and cook foods and honor their dead people with music and art and rituals. So these are all examples of public mourning on a large scale. And it's kind of a letdown because in much of Eurocentric cultures, and this can be attributed to globalization and colonialism and a whole host of other factors, a lot of communal mourning, especially in the United States, is minimized or skipped entirely. It's kind of like you get a funeral and you maybe get a funeral because a lot of people don't even have public funerals or memorials anymore, and then you're done. And this leaves a lot of grieving people feeling stuck between wanting to express their grief. I want to do something to memorialize this. I want to metaphorically or literally put a flag in the ground, or I want to plant a tree in the soil, or I want to put a stone in the earth to memorialize that something has happened. But culturally and societally, it makes them feel like not only am I not allowed to do that, but everybody wants me to move on. No one else is interested in doing this with me, and my only choice is to carry on without having done this memorializing rituals. And I kind of want to take a divergent tangent here because one of my favorite resources for life after loss is called Burnout: Completing the Stress Cycle. This is a book by Amelia and Emily Nagoski. They're sisters, and they talk about how to cope with major stressors on our nervous system. The best way to do that is to move it through your body, to create some sort of physical ritual where your brain, your body, your spirit, however you like to see your soul or your relationship to kind of that which is not on earth, um, is to do some sort of physical ritual that can signal to all of yourself, your brain, your mind, your heart, your soul, that something has ended or something has happened or something mattered. And so doing things like lighting a candle or journaling or sharing stories online or attending a funeral or putting a literal tree or flag or rock in the ground, like these are things that are all really important when you're grieving, not for selfish reasons of I'm going to do this for me, although you certainly can. It's not selfish if it helps you. Like I'm so baffled by people who are like, it's so selfish to film you releasing doves in honor of your dead baby. And I'm like, oh my God, people keep memories like this for themselves and do rituals like this for themselves to allow them to know on every level that something significant has happened. And they keep that so they can revisit that over and over again as a tribute to their person, as a tribute to how they've processed their grief, as a memory of what it felt like to be there at that time. It's something I'm just so passionate about. I don't like these I don't like these trolls that say I don't understand why people are filming themselves crying on the internet. This is a way of memorializing what is happening for us. That is a practice of mourning, especially in a culture that often teaches, I'm talking about white people culture here for a minute, that tears are to be oppressed, tears are a waste of time, they're not productive, and they are a signal that something about you is weak or inefficient or too soft to be in this world. I love seeing people's vulnerable examples of mourning online, whether they are, again, releasing birds or sharing photos or creating altars in their home or making art together or dancing together or crying in their car. I just love it. And I think that mourning as a practice is not valued enough, at least here in the United States. So I will say, if you're looking for a little permission slip in this episode, although this is not what this episode's about, one of the most healing things you can do for yourself, especially if you do not have a culture of mourning rituals to kind of reference back to, you can certainly hook yourself up with ancestry.com, figure out whence you came from, and figure out maybe what historical ancestors of yours did. This is something I'm very interested in and am pursuing right now, of like, what rituals do Scottish people do Irish people do Germanic people do when they are mourning someone. I've got all of this somewhere in my ancestry, and knowing what ancient people did, or even people who are just living in these places right now do to honor someone who has died, can help you connect to, in a way, respectfully, please do this respectfully, with ways that you might like to honor and grieve things that are happening in your life right now. And you can DIY your own mourning ritual. I talked about this in my first book, Permission to Grieve. There's permission to feel, to have feelings, permission to be, for your identity to shift in the aftermath of loss, and permission to do. And permission to do grief is about taking grief out into the world in whatever way resonates with you. You can certainly do big things. You can found a charity. You can raise money for a park bench. You can run a 5K. You can do all of these things that impact other people, but you can also build an altar in your home. You can rearrange your closet. You can cook a dish on a certain day of the month, every single month until you die. All of these are expressions of mourning because it is taking the manifestation of grief inside of your body and pushing it out into the world, either for yourself or for other people to see. It is for eyeballs to be absorbed, and it is for your body and your nervous system to recognize something significant happened and something significant is still happening, and that's okay. And if you're curious about ways to do this, we talk about how to design mourning rituals almost every single week in Life After Loss Academy, especially for really big and significant days like birthdays, anniversaries, death days, firsts for your year of first, but oftentimes too when you're crossing into double digits, like when it becomes 10 years or 20 years, to come up with mourning rituals and milestones to do that. So I want to close out by talking about why the heck do words matter? What's the point of this whole episode? And I think a lot of people, especially in this day and age when so many people are complaining that there's new words being invented left and right and I can't keep up and blah, blah, blah. I hear you. And also, human beings have been inventing words since the dawn of time. It's kind of what we do. So my pity for you only goes so far. But I think a lot of people, when it comes to these 4 words, it can feel like semantics or getting too nitty-gritty into the details. But I'll tell you that just like words in every other context, words hold power when you're grieving. And knowing the difference between loss, bereavement, grief, and mourning, these 4 things, is not just about being technical, it's about naming the experience that you're going through right now with more truth and more compassion for yourself. Because I'll tell you what, grief is already hard, and feeling confused about what's happening makes it even harder. And clear language, when you use it or when you ask other people to use it with you or about you, creates space for understanding, for permission to feel your feelings, to have your identity shift, to do things out in the world, and for healing. And if you're looking for a place where your grief is met with the same flavor of clarity and care, what is this? What's happening? Let's wrap words around it. Let's put step-by-step framework to it. You are always welcome to join us in Life After Loss Academy. It is a space where everyone in the group speaks grief fluently or is learning the language of grief. And we help you walk alongside grief with a community of support and also figure out how would you like to define your own grief experience, including and beyond these 4 words. And it's really a profound space where we do quite a lot of talking about what it means to be grieving and quite a lot of wordplay, playing with words to see what fits, to see what resonates, and to see kind of what lands as most true in our souls. What resonates for one grieving person will not always resonate for another grieving person, but oftentimes what resonates for one will resonate for many. And the feeling that we get is, oh, yes, I have finally landed on words to describe what it is that has only to this point been available to me in feelings. And that is a source of real grounding and real stability and very real comfort when you're grieving. That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so, so much for joining me today. If you're looking for grief support beyond this show, you can find free workshops, blog articles, and my signature What's Your Grief Support Style quiz at shelbyforsythia.com/links. If this podcast felt validating, educational, or otherwise helpful to you in your grief, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because you never know what someone you love is going through. A huge, huge, huge thank you to the Grief Growers community for supporting the show on Patreon. If you'd like to join them and help me keep this show free from ads for mattresses and meal delivery kits, because grief is hard enough without ads, head to patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. As a Patreon supporter, you get to help me choose new topics and guests for the show and get behind-the-scenes access to all of my upcoming projects, like that new book I've got coming out in 2026. Grief Growers hosted by me, Shelby Forsythia, with the theme music composed by our dear Addie Goldstein. Until next time, I see you. I am so, so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world. And I love you, because even through grief, we are growing.